She was just a quiet kid, headphones on, staring out the window of Flight 208. I then reached into the hidden panel, not even the flight attendants who passed her aisle again and again, offering drinks and polite smiles to everyone except her. She seemed invisible, and she preferred it that way. Her hood was pulled low, the sleeves of her jacket slightly oversized, and her sneakers were loosely tied like she didn't care if they came off mid-flight. To most people, she looked like any ordinary teenager traveling alone, maybe going to visit relatives, maybe returning from school vacation, nothing special, nothing worth a second glance. But there was something unusual in the way she sat so still, while the plane shuddered violently as it cut through storm clouds. Every few minutes the cabin jerked with turbulence, and passengers gasped or clutched their armrests, nervous laughter carrying through the aisles. Babies cried, overhead bins rattled, and anxious voices whispered prayers under their breath. Yet the girl in 17A didn't flinch. Her eyes were locked on the dark sky outside, eyes that were too alert, too steady for someone her age. The storm brewed bigger ahead, flashes of lightning painting the edges of the clouds in quick jolts of white. The captain's voice cracked over the speakers, calm yet tight, explaining that radio interference was affecting communications, but everyone should stay seated, buckle up, and remain calm. Most passengers nodded, trusting the reassuring tone of a uniformed professional. What they didn't notice was the subtle exchange of looks between the pilots in the cockpit, the slightly panicked tapping of buttons, the repeated attempts to reach air traffic control. The plane wasn't just experiencing routine issues, it was off the grid, flying blind. Still, no one outside the cockpit could sense the magnitude of that danger, no one except her. There was a sharp intelligence behind her steady gaze, like she wasn't merely watching the storm, she was waiting for something inside it. Every flash of lightning reflected in her eyes, and she blinked slowly, almost timing the darkness between the bursts. Her headphones played no music. The cord wasn't even connected. She was listening to the engines, to the faint whine of the electrical systems, to the changes in air pressure whispering through the fuselage, to signs no ordinary kid would ever notice. She shifted only once, sliding the hood back slightly as if the air felt too warm, revealing hair cut with precise, short edges military style, though no one around her would recognize it. A flight attendant finally stopped by her row, offering water. The girl looked up, and for a split second the attendant froze. There was a maturity in those eyes, a seriousness that didn't belong to any child. It made the attendant uncomfortable, though she didn't know why. She smiled nervously and moved on. A man sitting in 17C tried to make small talk earlier, asking if she traveled alone often. She had only nodded, not bothering to remove her headphones, not bothering to pretend she cared. After that, he left her alone. People assumed she was shy, maybe anxious, maybe homesick, but they were wrong. She wasn't frightened by the height or the storm. In fact, this was the one place she felt closest to herself, above the world, where fewer lies existed. Her fingers tapped lightly on the seat's armrest, tapping a rhythm too structured to be random. It was a coded beat, one she didn't even realize she was doing, muscle memory forming messages the way soldiers practiced without thinking. She stopped only when a loud strike of lightning illuminated the sky, revealing the silhouette of Too Fast, moving shadows slicing through the clouds far below the commercial plane. Most passengers kept their windows shut, choosing to ignore the chaos outside, but she noticed everything. Her eyes narrowed, watching the shapes with a focused familiarity. They weren't birds, and they weren't part of the storm. They were aircraft, powerful ones, flying dangerously close for this kind of airspace. She recognized the outlines immediately. Narrow wings, stealthy frames, built for speed and attack F-22 Raptors. But why were they here? Why were they tailing a commercial passenger flight in a storm? Her heartbeat quickened just enough to show she understood the implications. F-22s didn't escort planes unless the situation was serious, national security serious. Did the pilots know? Did the crew have any idea that the U.S. Air Defense had just made visual contact? No. They were too busy calming frightened passengers and wrestling with malfunctioning instruments. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly, letting her body relax deeper into the seat. She didn't want this, not today, not on this flight, not when she promised herself she would finally be just a normal kid for once. But normal had never belonged to her life. It never would. She wasn't supposed to draw attention. She wasn't supposed to be found. The thunder cracked again, and the aircraft jolted hard, a sharp dip that caused several passengers to scream. The captain's voice returned, shakier now, instructing everyone to remain seated. The seatbelt signs glowed brighter, as if shouting warnings into the cabin, and oxygen masks rattled prematurely above their compartments. The girl opened her eyes again, not panicked, calculating. She tilted her head slightly, as though listening to a voice no one else could hear. Her breathing slowed as her gaze slid back to the window, watching the storm swallow everything, including the two Raptors now circling closer. Something was coming, something she knew was inevitable. The world had taught her too early that peace never lasted, not for her. She pressed her thumb against the armrest, a tiny scar visible on her knuckle. A scar earned not from childhood play, but training, survival, missions too classified for even the pilots outside to discuss. She was young but not innocent, and as the plane lurched again, the cabin lights flickering into darkness for 3 whole seconds, she didn't gasp like the others. She smiled just barely, the kind of smile that appears when the truth finally catches up. Because she knew the storm outside wasn't the real danger. The real danger was already on board. 10 minutes later, alarms suddenly blared in the cockpit, sharp and urgent, cutting through the hum of the engines and sending a ripple of panic through the flight attendants and a few passengers who had been nervously dozing or staring out the windows. The lights on the control panels blinked erratically, red indicators flashing in sequences that no pilot wanted to see, and the autopilot system momentarily flickered off, forcing the captain to take manual control. In the blink of an eye, the flight deck transformed from routine monotony to a scene of controlled chaos. Fighter jets were scrambled almost immediately, 2 F-22 Raptors, their sleek black forms cutting through the stormy sky like predators on a hunt, closing in with astonishing speed. The commercial plane, Flight 208, had vanished completely from secondary radar, leaving air traffic controllers scrambling in a frenzy of confusion and tension. The turbulence outside seemed trivial compared to the storm inside the cockpit and on the radar screens, as the pilots tried to re-establish contact with the ground. Every button pressed, every switch toggled, felt like a lifeline thrown into an abyss. Then, as the 2 Raptors drew closer, almost perfectly in formation, their shadows momentarily passing over the fuselage like ominous harbingers, the lead F-22 pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "This is Eagle One. Identify the aircraft. Repeat, identify Flight 208. The captain still grappling with the failing communication system and the unnerving realization that they were being shadowed by 2 of the most advanced fighter jets in existence, reached for the microphone, fumbling slightly with his headset. Before he could reply, the co-pilot's finger, trembling slightly from adrenaline or perhaps disbelief, hovered over the passenger manifest, then shot out to point at a single name highlighted in bright yellow highlighter, Amelia Falcon Reyes. The co-pilot's eyes widened, a mixture of confusion and disbelief, and he looked at the captain, whose own jaw tightened as he read the name aloud. Amelia Falcon Reyes. A name that carried weight even in hushed military corridors, a legend in the air defense program, someone known for unmatched aerial tactics, strategic brilliance, and a calm that could calm even the most panicked fighter pilots. But here she was, according to the manifest, seated quietly in 17A, headphones on, looking like nothing more than a typical teenager traveling alone. The cognitive dissonance was immediate and overwhelming. How could this be the same person whose exploits were declassified only in small, carefully worded news articles, whose presence in any operational theater was strictly restricted? And yet, staring at the list, her age 14 years old, maybe 15, stared back like a mocking contradiction. It was impossible. A kid, a child, sitting in the middle of a commercial airliner, and yet the call sign Falcon ignited a wave of recognition, respect, and confusion among the pilots. The lead Raptor pilot, Eagle One, checked the identification numbers repeatedly, referencing the aircraft, but the name kept coming up, now etched in their memories like a warning and age. Promise at once, the co-pilot whispered under his breath, almost as if speaking too loudly would shatter reality itself. It can't be. His hands shook slightly, gripping the edge of the console, while the captain swallowed hard, trying to maintain calm for the crew and passengers who were unaware of what was happening just inches away. Meanwhile, Amelia, unaware of the full extent of the panic she had caused, leaned slightly forward, peering out the window with a quiet intensity, noting the Raptor jet's formation, the angle of their approach, and the subtle adjustments their pilots were making to maintain pace with a plane slower and far less maneuverable than their own. She didn't panic, she wasn't even nervous. There was a strange serenity about her, a presence that radiated control and calm even in the middle of a crisis, which only made the pilots outside more unnerved. They could feel it over the radio, and not fear, not hesitation, but a presence, a command almost, the weight of someone who belonged in this kind of situation far more than anyone else on the plane. The cockpit became a stage for an invisible conversation between legends, one of which had not even begun to reveal herself to the world outside the aircraft. The F-22 pilots, trained to detect the slightest anomaly, the faintest shift in behavior, the tiniest sign of recognition, scanned the interior as best they could from outside, their instruments picking up faint heat signatures, movements, and vibrations. And then the realization began to sink in. That small figure, that kid, that quiet presence in 17A was not just any child. She carried a history, a skill set, a legacy that could turn the tide of a mission or save lives in ways no ordinary adult could. The commercial plane continued to pitch and roll through the storm, passengers clutching at armrests, praying or staring in awe at the flashes of lightning illuminating the clouds outside, completely oblivious to the monumental realization unfolding in the cockpit. The lead pilot's hands moved faster, tapping sequences into his heads-up display, trying to maintain contact, verify, and prepare for any contingencies. His partner mirrored the movements, double, checking every signal, every coordinate, every response from Flight 208. Yet every glance toward seat 17A confirmed the same unexplainable truth. A kid, a legend, a falcon. The captain finally found his voice, strained, uncertain. "Of Flight 208, do you read? We have incoming military aircraft. Please confirm identity." But even as the words left his mouth, the co-pilot leaned over, whispering in disbelief, "Captain, she's Falcon." There was no immediate response from Amelia, who remained calm, absorbed in watching the storm and the jets slicing the sky around them, as if she were analyzing every movement and memorizing every detail, preparing for something no one else could see coming. The pilots outside adjusted their positions slightly, forming protective wings on either side, while internally trying to reconcile what should have been impossible. A classified operative, a living legend in tactical aerial defense, and yet just a kid with headphones and a notebook, traveling silently in the middle of an ordinary flight. Every second stretched tension thickening the cabin air, every jolt of the plane like a countdown, and the pilots realized that the world, everyone else on the plane, everyone on the ground, had no idea that history, or perhaps destiny, was quietly seated in 17A, watching, waiting, and ready to act. And even as the storm raged outside, Amelia's presence radiated a calm, silent warning that would soon turn the flight from an ordinary journey into a story no one on board would ever forget. The captain approached Amelia, a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and cautious curiosity written across his face, trying to process the impossibility of what he had just learned from the co-pilot. Whispered words. His steps toward seat 17A were deliberate but hesitant, each footfall sounding far too loud in the tense silence of the cabin, which had fallen into a quiet lull as if the storm outside had muted everything else. Passengers around them were oblivious, some reading, some dozing lightly, some nervously gripping armrests, completely unaware that the air they breathed was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with turbulence. Amelia, sitting there in her oversized hoodie, calm as a lake before a storm, didn't move a muscle until she noticed him approaching. She slowly removed her headphones, revealing her eyes fully, eyes that seemed to pierce through the captain's disbelief and straight into a place he didn't want to acknowledge, the truth. The calmness she exuded was unnatural for someone her age, almost predatory, like she had already lived through every scenario the captain could imagine and came out unscathed. And then she spoke one sentence, quiet, but chilling enough to make the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "They're not here to help." Those words lingered in the cabin like a shadow, leaving an eerie silence behind even as the engines hummed and the plane continued to shake from turbulence. The captain's mind raced. Who was she talking about? Was it the F-22 Raptors circling outside? Could a child really possess knowledge that even trained pilots were only beginning to understand? Amelia didn't wait for an answer. She stood, her movements deliberate, fluid, and devoid of hesitation, almost as if she had walked this path countless times before, almost as if she owned the very aisle she was moving through. Her shoes made soft, confident taps against the floor as she approached the cockpit, each step echoing a weight of authority that the adults in the cabin had never expected from someone so young. The captain, still trying to process everything, followed cautiously, realizing that he could no longer treat this as an ordinary situation. His hands twitched slightly, unconsciously adjusting the microphone on his headset as he tried to establish communication with the fighter jets outside, the pilots who had been waiting for confirmation, their high-tech instruments scanning and analyzing every movement on the plane, every sound, every shift in weight, trying to identify potential threats. And then the radio crackled with a tense, clipped voice. "Flight 208, this is Eagle One. Confirm identification. Repeat, confirm identification. We require authorization to approach." The F-22 pilots were trained to expect anything, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for what came next. Amelia stopped just inside the cockpit doorway, looking up at them with eyes that were steady, unwavering, and full of command, the kind of command that could only come from someone who had been trained, who had been tested, who had already faced danger and learned to master it. She took a deep breath, almost ceremonious in its calmness, and then spoke, her voice carrying a confidence and authority that sent shockwaves through the pilot's earpieces. "This is Falcon. Code Bravo 7, do not fire. Threat is internal." The words were precise, military in their cadence, and yet somehow carried the unmistakable weight of truth. The pilots froze, their fingers pausing over their controls, their instincts screaming at them to act, but their minds recognizing the significance of the call sign, the precision of the code, certainty behind her tone. This voice, this small, young-sounding voice, held more authority than any manual, more experience than any recorded briefing, more danger than anything they had faced in years of flight operations. The realization hit them like a lightning bolt. The classified call sign, Falcon, known only to the highest echelons of the air defense program, belonged to the girl standing calmly before them. They had been trained to expect deception, to anticipate threats from enemies both foreign and domestic, to recognize the telltale signs of imposters, but none of their training accounted for this. A child, a literal teenager, embodying the legend they had only ever heard about in classified reports. The F-22 pilots' fingers hovered over weapon controls, their eyes wide behind the helmets, as adrenaline coursed through their veins in a mixture of awe and disbelief. In the cockpit of a commercial airliner, Amelia remained calm, almost serene, her body language betraying none of the urgency, none of the fear, none of the panic that the adults and the pilots had expected in such a high-stakes situation. And yet everything about her, the slight tilt of her head, the way she measured each word, the way she maintained eye contact with the pilots outside, communicated readiness, intelligence, and authority that went far beyond her years. The captain, standing just behind her, could barely believe what he was seeing. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in his throat, swallowed by the magnitude of what was unfolding. The storm outside continued to lash at the plane, shaking it with fierce gusts, lightning cutting the clouds into jagged white streaks, but inside, the tension between Amelia and the F-22 pilot created a different kind of storm, one of recognition, authority, and the unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary was taking place. Every second stretched, measured, significant. The pilot's advanced avionics systems detected subtle signals, minor shifts in cabin pressure, heat signatures, even the micro movements of Amelia as she subtly assessed the interior of the plane. And they understood instinctively that she was not merely reacting, she was commanding, she was calculating, she was preparing for contingencies that none of them could fully anticipate. And then, with the clarity of someone who had trained their mind and body to respond to the impossible, Amelia turned slightly, scanning the cabin and the cockpit in one fluid motion, as if she were filing away critical data for later use. The F-22 pilots, still frozen, could hear her next words over the radio, precise and measured: "Do not fire. Threat is internal." Every syllable carried weight, every pause carried meaning. The gravity of the situation, a threat already aboard the plane, combined with the presence of a legend they were only beginning to realize, sank deep into their consciousness. And yet Amelia stood there, unflinching, a child on the outside, a falcon on the inside, ready to confront whatever came next with the skill, the courage and the clarity of someone far beyond her years. Suddenly the plane shuddered violently, more than any turbulence could have caused, throwing passengers against their seatbelts and eliciting a chorus of gasps and startled cries throughout the cabin, and in that instant it became horrifyingly clear to those who had been watching closely, or who had any understanding of danger at all, that this was not the storm outside, nor any mechanical failure, nor an ordinary in-flight emergency. Hidden among the passengers, a hijacker had been biding his time, blending into the ordinary crowd, his presence masked by clothing, luggage, and the chaos of the storm, waiting for the precise moment when the blackout in communications and the turbulence would give him the perfect opportunity to strike, to take control of the aircraft and potentially alter the course of hundreds of lives in a matter of seconds. His eyes darted toward the cockpit as he moved, weapon in hand, and the tension in the cabin escalated to an almost unbearable level, though most passengers remained blissfully unaware, engrossed in movies, games, or quiet murmurs with family members, completely oblivious to the life and death struggle that was about to unfold mere feet away. Amelia, sitting in seat 17, a moment earlier with an almost meditative calm, reacted instantaneously the moment she perceived the threat, a reaction honed through years of clandestine training, drills, and experiences that had been classified and shielded from the public eye. In a blur of motion, she sprang from her seat, her body moving with a fluidity, speed, and precision that left anyone watching in awe and disbelief. She didn't hesitate, she didn't falter, she didn't show fear. She was a storm within the storm, unstoppable, a force that had been forged in discipline and necessity. Her movements were perfectly calculated, every step and gesture anticipating the hijacker's next action, neutralizing him within seconds, her small frame belying the power and skill she wielded. By the time the hijacker even realized his plan had been thwarted, the threat had been completely eliminated, restrained and disarmed, leaving him helpless and bewildered as he stared into the eyes of someone who, to the casual observer, appeared to be just another teenage passenger. Simultaneously, the F-22 Raptors circling outside, their sleek black frames slicing through the storm clouds like shadows of the sky itself, received final confirmation from command, the words, Echoing over secure channels and into their heads-up displays, Falcon confirmed, proceed to escort. That single phrase carried the weight of authority, the relief of recognition, and the acknowledgement that the situation was now under control, a validation that the person everyone had feared might be in over her head was, in fact, fully capable of managing an incredibly dangerous scenario with skill and composure. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the passengers continued their routines, oblivious to the reality that their lives had been in grave danger only moments before, unaware that a legend, a protector, a guardian in the form of a child with the call sign Falcon, had just walked among them and saved them from disaster. Amelia returned to her seat 17A, her composure restored, her body relaxed once more as if the previous chaos had been nothing more than a minor disturbance in her otherwise disciplined life. The captain and co-pilot, still grappling with disbelief and awe, exchanged glances that spoke volumes. The co-pilot leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper, trembling with a mixture of admiration, shock, and the unspoken acknowledgement of a truth they had only just uncovered. And he asked the question that had been burning in everyone's mind since her identity was revealed. How old are you? Amelia didn't answer with words immediately. Instead, she smiled, a knowing, almost playful smile, the kind that carried a lifetime of experience far beyond what any ordinary child could possess. A smile that conveyed wisdom, courage, and assurance that everything was now as it should be. She turned slightly, looking out the window where the F-22s maintained their vigilant escort, their lights flickering faintly in the stormy atmosphere, a silent reminder that even the most advanced technology recognized the authority, skill, and bravery of the young operative within the commercial airliner. And then, in a voice calm yet unmistakably authoritative, carrying a weight that made anyone listening understand the full significance of her words, she spoke, old enough to protect the skies. Those words hung in the cabin, in the minds of the pilots, and in the hearts of the invisible witnesses, a phrase that encapsulated her identity, her purpose, and the extraordinary duality of her life, a child to the world, a falcon to those who knew the truth. The flight continued, turbulence still lashing at the plane, passengers shifting nervously but unaware of the danger that had passed, while Amelia returned to her quiet vigil by the window, her headphones back on, the hoodie pulled slightly over her head, resuming the guise of an ordinary teenager once more. The F-22s maintained their protective position, ensuring the plane reached its destination safely, their pilots exchanging silent nods of respect, fully aware of the unprecedented situation they had witnessed. The extraordinary skill and maturity of someone they had assumed could not exist in someone so young. And in that ordinary, looking, seemingly unremarkable seat 17A, Amelia remained quiet, composed, vigilant, and resolute, a living embodiment of courage, intelligence, and heroism, her presence a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that age did not define capability, and that the most extraordinary defenders of the skies sometimes came in the smallest, most unsuspecting packages, ready to face threats unseen and protect lives in ways no one could anticipate.